Welcome to Nowairville. Okay, so it's technically called Nowairville, but it might as well be Nowairville. Not much happens here, or so I thought up until recently. My name's Harvey, and I currently go to Nowairvil High School, even though no one else seems to notice. And just like the rest of this town, the school is perfectly average in terms of excitement. In fact, you could make the case it's below average in excitement, because even average schools usually have something going on, even if it's petty freshman drama. I'm new to this school and this town, and while it's usually just as I described, every once in a while I see something weird. Something I don't think I'm supposed to see. Once, when I was walking in a bad part of town, I saw what looked to be a homeless guy. That's not the weird part. We made eye contact, and I swear something was wrong with him. I've heard that the eyes are the windows to the soul, and his were just empty. Blank. It's like there was a moving body in front of me, but no person inside of it. He didn't say anything, though, to be fair, I got out of there so quickly that I didn't really give him the chance. But that's not all. Another time, I had to go to a convenience store near my house late at night to get some milk. I opened up the refrigerator door to grab a jug of milk, but right as I was about to grab it, I was startled by a woman behind me saying excuse me and trying to scoot past me towards the chips. I was unalarmed at first, but as I paid for the milk and left, I realized that just a few seconds before she said anything, I had seen myself in the reflection of the window. And she wasn't there. It was just a quick look, nothing major, but I swear I would have noticed her. She was wearing a long coat with a collar obscuring her face, and she was very tall and slender with jet black hair. Now let me just mention that I love watching crime shows. Crime shows are my jam. I love watching them investigating, hunting for clues, and trying to solve problems. But at this point, I didn't have enough root evidence to launch an investigation. That homeless guy could have just been on drugs, and I could have just missed that woman when looking at the reflection. It wasn't enough. Besides, those things happened in places that horror movies tend to take place in. A bad part of town, a convenience store late at night. These were places my imagination could have just been running wild, filling in the gaps. But then something else strange happened at the most normal place on Earth. Nowairvil High. Something involving my science teacher, Mr. Orman. Mr. Orman fit right in at Nowairvil High. In fact, just about everyone liked him. He was a nice guy, charismatic, and a great science teacher, but something about him never quite clicked for me. Something about the fact that he was once a big-name scientist and now he taught a high school science class in Nowairville just didn't sit right with me. He says he grew up in Nowairville and wanted to, quote-unquote, get back to his roots, but something about it seemed off. There had to be a reason why he was teaching high school chemistry in a school so poor that his classroom has a TV with a built-in VHS player and no remote. But God knows people do things that don't make sense all the time, so while I thought he was weird, he didn't seem suspicious to me. But then one day in class, I went up to Mr. Orman to ask him a question. Hey, Mr. Orman, could you tell me what page the homework starts on?
Sure, Harvey. The homework is in the book on...
He started stuttering, like he wasn't focused on what he was doing. Are you okay, Mr. Orman? Something seemed wrong. His face was turning red and he started to sweat and pant.
Yeah, Harvey,
I wasn't very convinced. I backed up to give him some air and he began to calm down.
I'm sorry about that, Harvey. I don't know what came over me. The homework starts on page 53 in your textbook.
No one else really seemed fazed by this. Either they hadn't heard it or they just ignored it, but I couldn't tell which, so I just sat down. But then when I was leaving the classroom at the end of class that day, the same thing happened. Mr. Orman was standing next to the door, saying goodbye to everyone as they left, and he suddenly froze up when I walked past. Something was fishy. Then I realized that I had been wearing my cross necklace that day. Something was wrong with Mr. Orman, and I was going to figure it out. I just needed some more evidence. Luckily, I had just decided to launch an investigation. I realized the first thing I needed to do was get more information on Mr. Orman. I I remembered that he ran the school's photography club, so I decided to approach C.J. Robinson, the student president of the photography club between classes. Hey, C.J., could I talk to you for a second?
Yeah, sure, but I can't talk long. I have class in a couple minutes and I still have to stop in my locker.
This won't take long. So, I was thinking about joining photography. What's it like?
Oh, the photography club is great. There's this great level of freedom that comes with all of us going out and finding stuff to take photos of.
And does Mr. Orman take you guys out there himself, or is it independent?
It's just by ourselves. Mr. Orman thinks it's important that we work independently.
He never leaves the school with you guys?
No.
Have you ever seen him leave the school?
No, he says he needs to lock up. Are you asking me questions about the photography club or Mr. Orman?
Well, Mr. Orman is the head of the...
Look, I gotta go. I'll see you around,
he said, cutting me off and walking away. I wasn't very good friends with him anyway, but it was coming together. I've never really seen Mr. Orman leave the school, at least not during the day. And Mr. Orman locks up? That's weird. Shouldn't a janitor be doing that? I realized I needed the person who knew the most about what was going on in the school. At first I wanted to meet with Principal Krupnik, but then I realized I was actually looking for Janitor Marty. I managed to catch up with him right before lunch and ask him a few questions.
Hey Harvey, what's up?
Hey Marty, I have an after-school activity later, and I was wondering when Mr. Orman usually leaves. I have to hand in an assignment, and I want to make sure he doesn't leave before I have the chance.
You should be fine. That man stays here so late sometimes. I give him the keys and he locks up.
He's here that late?
Yeah, he practically lives here. He's always in his room until late at night, grading papers and using the equipment. He's always here first thing in the morning before the sun comes up.
Well, clearly he was very dedicated to his work. It was all starting to come together. I had 2 witnesses that were around Mr. Orman all the time and have never seen him leave the school, especially during the day. He was repulsed by my cross necklace. I had figured it out. Mr. Orman was a vampire, and that night I was going to sneak into the school and find proof. At 10 p.m., the school seemed like a shell of what it usually was, like a ghost. The last quarter moon hung low in the sky, giving me my only light. The wind was howling when I stepped inside. I brought with me a camera to get a good picture and 2 wooden stakes that I could use as a cross or as, well, stakes if something went wrong. Creeping through the hallways, there was this feeling of soullessness. That without other people here, it was no longer a school. Like I was in a mausoleum. Oh shit! The scream echoed through the halls, funneling down from the stairs leading to the next floor up. My heart was racing as I, myself, was racing up the steps and towards Mr. Orman's room. I kicked open the door to the shady room, holding both stakes in a cross position. My eyes immediately darted to the ground. Laying before me on the ground was one unconscious C.J. Robinson. As I realized I was seeing, I heard a low growl. I slowly raised my gaze to see a pair of yellow eyes glowing in the dark. The growl grew louder as the monster inched closer, slowly coming into the moonlight, its snarling snout and mangy dark brown fur were revealed. It was as if a wolf was standing on 2 legs, ready to pounce on its next victim. Oh, he's a werewolf. That makes sense. That cross necklace was made out of silver. He loomed over CJ's body with bloodlust in his eyes. In his hairy, clawed right hand, he held a syringe, but he set it onto his desk as his eyes locked on me. I felt paralyzed as he slowly lurched towards me. I started off in a sprint. After all, respect your teachers and do what you're told, right? Not the time? Okay. The sounds of scuffling and howling let me know that he was close by. I jumped down the stairs, using the opportunity to make some distance between me and the werewolf. I might be a fast runner, but I know my limits, and they definitely include werewolves. So I tried to knock over as many things as I could as I passed them to slow him down. Nonetheless, when I left the school, Mr. Orman was soon to follow. I can't let him go into town, I thought, but he was following me. So I decided the best thing to do was to run into the woods and let him follow me in. The forests were tall and thick. Some might say woodsy.
I'm still new to this town, but even I've heard the stories of people going into the woods behind the school and never coming back out. The trees were twisted and the leaves were dead. The moonlight cast through the branches and leaves created all sorts of strange shadows. In the darkness, it was hard to tell what was a tree and what was a shadow. I eventually found a tree that I was at least 75% sure was real and crouched behind it. With all the dead leaves and branches on the ground, the only way to not alert my science teacher of where I was to stay put and hide. Crunch, 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 crunch. The werewolf was approaching. I began rubbing dirt on my skin to try and cover up my scent. I could hear the werewolf sniffing in an attempt to find me. I heard him getting nearer and nearer. Then he stopped, approximately 3 feet from the tree I was at. His nose was going like crazy. My heart never raced faster until suddenly... crunch, crunch. I've never been more relieved in my life than at that moment. As the creature snuck through the trees and branches, I slowly backed away. I tried with my life to avoid stepping on the leaves and twigs lying beneath my feet like mouse traps. My goal was to inch back to safety and cook up a solution while the beast was looking for me in the forest. But what could I do to stop Mr. Orman? I could just wait for sunup, but he might hurt people. And I couldn't find something silver and kill him. He's my science teacher. I was just a kid, and this thing was a... Run! I'd gotten lost in my own train of thought and stepped on a twig only a few yards away from the clearing. Back to the school it is then. Crunch, crunch, crunch. I heard it again, but this time it was much, much faster. The cool October air brushed against my face as I sprinted towards the school. I was no longer thinking, just running with the same primal instinct as the creature chasing me. Over the gate, through the doors, using everything I could to create a barricade between me and this freak of nature. This freak of Nowairvil High. As I ran through the hallways and up the steps, I locked and blocked every pair of doors I passed to buy me a little more time. I locked myself into Mr. Orman's room, looking for an answer. He had to have a journal or something, right? I could hear him slamming on the doors, trying to force his way in. There was nothing in his desk. Clearly he didn't want people figuring this out. But where else could it be? Crash! He had gone into the school. Luckily, there was still plenty of doors between me and him. But the barricade in front of the entrance was the biggest one. If he was able to bust through the entrance, it was only a matter of time before he got to me. Come on, where else could he have hidden information about his condition? Crash. The dark room. It had to be in the dark room. I turned on my phone's flashlight and crept inside. Crash! I had to move quickly. I shuffled through the drawers, but there wasn't much to be found. But then I saw a remote. A TV remote. Mr. Orman had always had a TV in his room, but he always said he had lost the remote. Maybe this was a clue. Crash! I didn't have any more leads, and there were only 3 more doors, including the door to Mr. Orman's room, between me and the monster, so I needed to act fast. I went back to the main room and I flicked on the TV. The TV had a built-in VHS player on the side, and a tape that was already inside began to play. Mr. Orman, the human one, flickered onto the screen. He looked about 10 years or so younger. Hello, my name is L.N. Orman, and I am affected by a rare disease commonly referred to as lycanthropy. His clothes were torn and ragged, his hair messed up. I developed this disease when I was a child. The whole reason I started my journey into science was to try and find a cure. Crash! He needed to speed this up. In my studies, I eventually did in fact find a cure. A liquid drug that, when injected into my veins, negated the effects of moonlight and prevented my transformations. If you're watching this, something has gone very, very wrong. Crash! The only thing left between me and the creature was some hallway and Mr. Orman's classroom door. I've already observed that over time, the effects of my serum have become less and less powerful, as my body continues to grow tolerant of it. I could hear his claws scraping against the linoleum floors as Mr. Orman skittered down the hall. I know this because just recently I transformed into one of my colleagues. Now I believe I'll have to leave my position at the university I work at and lay low to prevent this from happening again. The beast was banging on the door. I was running out of time. The most likely scenario is that I didn't inject enough serum to stop the transformation, either because the moon is too strong or because I underestimated the amount I would need. I could hear the screws in the locks beginning to give way. You must find more serum and inject it into me. For best results, right into a vein on the arm or neck. An injectable serum sounds very familiar. That must have been what the werewolf was holding earlier, and was right there on the desk. I got it in my hand right before the creature burst through the door. His fangs were out, his claws were sharp, and he was pissed. Hey, don't eat me, eat him! I slid CJ's still unconscious body across the floor and towards the monster. Don't worry, I didn't let him die, I just needed a distraction. More specifically, I needed a distraction that would force him to bend so his neck was toward me. As he crouched down, getting ready to sink his teeth in, I swooped over and swiftly injected him with the serum right before he took a bite of the photography club president. His eyes hued from yellow to blue. The beast's claws and fangs retracted as its long snout morphed back into a human nose. His thick, dark fur fell to the ground in clumps, revealing his skin. His joints and bones popped and broke as his figure changed back into a man. Yup, that's my science teacher. He looked up at me with apologetic eyes, knowing the sins he had caused. I never told anyone about Mr. Orman. Together we cleaned up the school and sent CJ home after he woke up, convincing him that it was all a dream. I wish. I went home that night, and when I came back to school the next morning, we both pretended like nothing had happened. A few weeks later, Mr. Orman disappeared. I still don't know what happened to him, but I assume he moved somewhere else to keep his secret. But what I saw that night, I will never unsee. And I was just getting started. If this incident had taught me anything, it's that something weird really is going on in this town. And I will figure out what it is. But for now, I guess the case is closed on the freak of Nowairvil High.